My name is Alara Bennett. I'm 29 years old, and for a little over 2 years, I believed I was building a future with Mason. We didn't live together yet. He had a studio apartment across town, and I rented a one-bedroom about 15 minutes away. Around our 2-year mark, we had talked about moving in together. We looked at listings, joked about furniture, argued over whether a couch should be comfortable or pretty, and for a while, it felt like we were moving towards something real. Then the date came and went. Mason said it was logistics, leases, timings, money. I believed him because when you care about someone, excuses can start sounding far more reasonable than they should. But deep down, I think I already knew there was another reason. Her name was Elena, though everyone called her Lena. Mason's ex-girlfriend. They had dated for 3 years before me. He told me their breakup was mutual, almost too smoothly, like a man repeating a line he had used before. We just grew apart, he said on our second date. At the time, I admired how calm he sounded. I thought it meant maturity. Later, I realized some people sound calm because they have practiced the lie enough times to stop flinching. Lena moved away for about a year after their breakup. Then, 8 months into my relationship with Mason, she moved back. That was when the lunches started. The first time Mason asked me, Lena reached out, he said. She's having a hard time moving back. She wants to grab coffee. Are you okay with that? I said yes, because I didn't want to be the jealous girlfriend. I didn't want to turn my insecurity into rules. I believed trust meant leaving the door open and trusting the person you loved not to walk through it. So I smiled and said, of course, if she needs a friend, that's fine. That was before coffee became lunch. Before lunch became, she just needs someone to talk to. Before someone to talk to became a standing Wednesday appointment. And before Wednesdays somehow became whenever Lena texted, which was often enough that her name started appearing on Mason's phone like a warning I kept choosing not to read. Every time I brought it up, he gave me the same answer. She needs closure. She's still processing the breakup. I'm the only person who really understands what she went through. They had been broken up for 3 years. A woman who still needs repeated lunches years after a breakup to process it doesn't need closure. She needs therapy. Or she is already getting exactly what she wants, just without honesty. But I still wanted to believe him. That was the embarrassing part. Even an intelligent woman can find herself negotiating against her own instincts when the alternative means accepting painful truth. You feel the truth pressing against your ribs, but you keep asking it to wait outside because you are not ready to lose the life you imagined. Then Theo entered the picture. Theo was Mason's best friend. They had known each other since high school, the kind of friendship built on old group chats, blunt insults, and loyalty neither of them ever had to explain out loud. Theo and I had always gotten along. He was direct in a way that made some people uncomfortable but made me feel safe. If something was wrong, he said it. If a joke didn't land, he told you. If everyone else in the room was pretending not to notice something ugly, Theo noticed it. I never understood why Mason sometimes seemed tense around him, until 5 weeks before everything fell apart. Theo texted me on a Tuesday night. Can we talk tomorrow? Not over text, it's about Mason. I stared at that message for a long time because some texts feel heavy before you even open the whole truth inside them. The next morning, we met at a coffee shop near my office. Theo was already there, sitting by the window, both hands wrapped around a paper cup he hadn't touched. He looked tired, not sleepy, guilty. I sat across from him and said, "You're scaring me." He let out a breath. "I'm going to tell you something, and you're going to be angry. Hopefully not at me, but you're going to be angry." My stomach tightened. "Okay." He rubbed the back of his neck. "The lunches with Lena aren't just lunches." For a second, the room blurred around me. The grinder, the music, the cups, the people ordering drinks like the world hadn't just shifted under my chair. I said, "What do you mean?" Theo looked miserable. I saw texts. Mason leaves his phone around me because he thinks I won't look. Usually I don't. But a message popped up while we were watching something at his place. I didn't move. "It was from Lena," he said carefully. "I won't repeat it word for word, but it wasn't something you send to someone you're getting closure with." My mouth went dry. "How bad?" He unlocked his phone. Bad enough that I screenshotted it before I could talk myself out of it. Then he slid the phone across the table. I looked down, and there it was. A message from Lena referencing something intimate, specific, familiar. The kind of detail a woman doesn't know unless the man beside you has let her close enough to remember it. Mason's reply was worse. Not shocked. Not uncomfortable. Not guilty. Just easy. Flirtatious. Comfortable. Like this wasn't a mistake. Like it was routine. I stared at the screen while some soft acoustic song played overhead, And I remember thinking how cruelly normal everything was. People were still ordering lattes. Someone near the counter laughed. A barista called out a name. And I was sitting there with proof that the man I loved had made me the last person to understand my own relationship. I pushed the phone back. How long? Theo shook his head. I don't know exactly. I suspected for at least 2 months. The texts I saw were recent, but the tone wasn't new. That hurt more than the message. A betrayal can happen once. Comfort means repetition. I asked, why are you telling me? Theo looked me straight in the eye. Because Mason is my best friend, and I love him like a brother. But what he's doing to you is garbage. Every time I tell him to stop, he says I'm being dramatic. He says you'd understand if you knew the full context. His jaw tightened. There is no context that makes this okay. I didn't cry in that coffee shop. I thanked him. I meant it. Then I drove to work, sat in the parking lot for almost 20 minutes with both hands on the steering wheel, and realized I had been doing emotional math wrong for months. The real number was uglier than I wanted it to be. I didn't confront Mason that night, or the next, or even that weekend. Proof does not always create instant courage. More often, it creates a quiet war inside you. Part of you knows. Another part starts defending the person who hurt you because accepting the truth means accepting that the future you were picturing was built on someone else's lie. Maybe Theo misunderstood. Maybe the text was old. Maybe Lena was flirting and Mason didn't know how to stop it. Maybe. That word can keep a person trapped for a long time. So instead of exploding, I watched. Not obsessively. I didn't follow him or check his phone. I just listened differently. And once you know someone is lying, their words change texture. Before, Mason's explanations sounded patient. After, they sounded rehearsed. That first week, he said, Lena's having a rough time. The next week, her therapist canceled. Then, she's dealing with family stuff. Then, it's just lunch, Ilara. You're overthinking it. I started keeping notes in my phone. Dates, excuses, lunch times, stories, contradictions. Not because I wanted revenge. I needed something solid. Gaslighting doesn't always look like screaming. Sometimes it's just hearing the same lie so many times that your instincts begin to feel unreasonable. Seeing everything written out changed something. 7 lunches in 1 month. 7. Nobody accidentally prioritizes someone 7 times. During those 2 weeks, Theo and I kept talking. Not secretly, not romantically, not in the way Mason would later try to twist it. We were 2 people standing on opposite sides of the same betrayal. Sometimes Theo would text, Mason told me Lena just needed advice. Same story. And I'd reply, apparently now she's having family issues too. One night, Theo called me after midnight. His voice sounded wrecked. I hate this, he said. I was sitting cross-legged on my couch in old pajamas, untouched tea cooling beside me. I know. No, he said. I really hate this. He's my best friend. I know. He went quiet. Then he asked, am I a terrible person? That question stayed with me, because only decent people ask it after doing the right thing. The truly selfish rarely lose sleep over the damage they cause. I said softly, no, you're the only honest person in this situation. He laughed, but it sounded tired. Doesn't feel like it? Doing the right thing usually feels awful before it feels clean. Another silence. Then he said, he's going to blame me. Probably. And you? What about me? Are you going to stay with him? That question hit harder than I expected. Because until he asked it, I hadn't realized some part of me was still leaving that door cracked open. Love is humiliating that way. You can know someone hurt you and still secretly hope they will become someone else by morning. I didn't answer right away. Finally, I said, I don't know. Theo exhaled. That scares me. Me too. The next morning, Mason sent me a photo of a croissant from some cafe with the caption, thinking of you. I stared at it for a full minute. The cruelty of betrayal is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is how normal the betrayer stays, how casually they text, how comfortably they kiss your forehead, how naturally they ask about your day, as if deception is just another part of their routine. I replied with a heart emoji. I didn't send it because I felt loving. I sent it because I needed him comfortable. That realization made me feel sick. I didn't want to become calculating. But once trust breaks, even soft people start learning strategy. By the 3rd week, my sadness had turned into something colder. Not rage. Clarity. I remember standing in my bathroom one morning, brushing my teeth, looking at myself in the mirror and thinking, you already know. You're just waiting for your heart to catch up. Then Thursday happened. The 7th lunch. Mason texted me around 10:40 in the morning. Lena needs to talk. We're grabbing lunch at that Italian place on the boulevard. Don't wait for dinner. Might run late. I read it twice. Same wording. Same casual tone. Same assumption that I would simply accept it. Something inside me went very still. At first, I mistook that stillness for peace. Later, I understood it was the moment I stopped negotiating with reality. I typed back, "Hope she finds closure." Then I put my phone down and called Theo. He answered on the second ring. "Elara? She's going to the Italian place." Pause. "Today?" "Yes." Another pause. Then quietly, "I know." Of course he knew. Mason had probably told him some version already. I leaned against the kitchen counter. "Want to have lunch?" Theo laughed once, short and nervous. "With you?" "At the same restaurant." Silence. Then, "Are you serious?" "Completely." "What exactly is the plan?" I looked out the window. The sky was bright, painfully ordinary, completely indifferent to the fact that my life was splitting open. "No screaming," I said. "No public breakdown, no dramatic scene. Just lunch." "Elara, if Mason says it's innocent, there shouldn't be a problem." Theo understood immediately. "You're terrifying." "Only recently." He laughed for real this time. "What time?" "Noon." Pause. Then he said, "I'll wear something nice." For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Because some endings don't begin with tears. Some begin with perfect timing. At 12:15, I pulled up outside Theo's apartment. He came down wearing a navy button-down and the expression of a man who knew he was walking into something either deeply satisfying or catastrophically awkward. When he got in, he looked at me. "You look calm." I almost laughed. "I'm not calm," I said, pulling away from the curb. "I'm just past the point where panic is useful." The drive was short. Neither of us filled it with fake conversation. No rehearsed lines, no forced jokes. Emotional confrontations become ridiculous when you overplan them. Real betrayals usually don't happen under perfect lighting. They happen in normal places, around normal people, while someone nearby is asking for extra bread. When we got there, Theo adjusted his sleeves. "Last chance to abort." I parked and turned off the engine. "If I leave now," I said, "I'll spend the rest of my life wondering if I imagined everything." He studied my face, then nodded. "Fair." As we walked toward the entrance, he held the door open for me. "Very gentlemanly," I said. "I'm committing to the bit." That made me smile, and I needed that, because beneath my composure, my stomach was in knots. Suspicion still leaves room for hope. Proof does not. The hostess greeted us cheerfully. "Reservation?" "No," Theo said. I scanned the room casually, or at least I hoped it looked casual. Then I saw them. Back left booth. 2 wine glasses. Mason. Lena. They were sitting on the same side. His arms stretched lazily across the back of the booth behind her shoulders. Not touching exactly, but intimate in that dishonest little way people pretend doesn't count. Lena leaned toward him, laughing at something on his phone. Not politely, not distantly, comfortably. Routine has a look. That lunch had it. Theo followed my gaze and muttered, "Wow." Just one word, but it was enough. The hostess offered us a table near the window. Perfect. Close enough to be seen. Far enough not to perform. We sat, ordered drinks. I chose an Arnold Palmer. Theo got sparkling water. Then we opened our menus like two people who had absolutely not placed themselves in the middle of a live emotional crime scene. For a few minutes, nothing happened. That almost made it worse. Life kept moving. Waiters crossed the floor. Someone nearby debated pasta. A child dropped a spoon. Normalcy can feel insulting when your private world is collapsing. Theo looked over his menu. "You actually hungry?" "Shockingly, yes." "That feels unhealthy." "Maybe." But the truth was, once certainty arrived, part of me relaxed. Uncertainty is heavier than pain. Pain, at least, tells the truth. We ordered calamari. Then we talked. Not about Mason, not about Lena. Just life. Theo told me about a work disaster involving a client who accidentally replied all to an email insulting his own team. I told him about the time I wore 2 different heels into an important meeting because I got dressed in the dark. He nearly choked laughing. And the strangest part was that it became a genuinely good lunch. That felt morally confusing. Like I was supposed to stay devastated every second to prove the relationship had mattered. But human emotion is rarely that obedient. There I was, laughing at a ridiculous story about mismatched shoes while my relationship quietly collapsed across the room. That doesn't make the love fake. It means the heart is complicated. About 20 minutes in, Mason looked up. Maybe to flag a waiter. Maybe because guilt has its own radar. His eyes moved across the room and landed on me. I watched recognition hit him in real time. Confusion. Disbelief. Panic. Then his gaze moved to Theo. Then to our table. Then to our hands resting near each other, not touching, but close enough to invite the kind of assumption guilty people love to make. His whole body changed, like invisible wires had been pulled tight. Lena noticed. She turned, saw us, and her face collapsed in a quieter way. For weeks I had imagined that moment. I thought I might feel triumphant, vindicated, powerful. But mostly I felt tired, because catching someone does not erase the cost of having doubted yourself for so long. Mason said something sharply to Lena. She froze where she was, clearly deciding whether getting involved would make things worse. Mason started walking toward us. His face was controlled. Too controlled. He stopped at our table, looked at Theo, then at me. "Why are you here with Theo?" His voice was low, sharp, dangerously polite. I set my glass down and looked up at him. For the first time in weeks, I did not feel confused. That alone felt like freedom. "Lunch," I said. For a second, none of us moved. He seemed to be waiting for something else. A justification, an apology, a panicked explanation. But I had spent too many weeks being the only person in our relationship expected to explain herself. So I picked up another piece of calamari instead. Theo took a sip of water like this was the most ordinary Thursday of his life. Mason's jaw tightened. "This is funny to you?" "No," I said. Funny would imply surprise. That landed. He pulled out a chair from the neighboring table, but didn't sit. He just held it, knuckles pale against the wood. "What exactly are you doing here?" "Eating lunch." "With him?" Theo leaned back. "Good to see you too." Mason ignored him. I looked at Mason and realized he truly believed he was the injured party. That fascinated me in the saddest way. Some people lie so often they build a private courtroom in their own mind where they are always the victim, no matter what evidence walks in. I said, "You told me where you'd be." "That doesn't mean..." "Doesn't mean what?" His expression hardened. "Don't do this." That phrase almost made me laugh. "Don't do this." As if I had arranged his arm around Lena. As if I had made the lunch intimate. As if accountability was the rude part. I set my napkin down. "Mason, what exactly do you think I'm doing?" His voice dropped. "You're trying to embarrass me." "No," I said. "You're embarrassed because I happened to witness something you've spent months explaining away." He let out a bitter laugh. "Ilara, this is ridiculous." "No, ridiculous is telling your girlfriend a woman needs closure for months while drinking wine with her at noon, like you're halfway through a date." His face flushed. "Not because I was wrong, because I said it out loud. Truth gets heavier when witnesses can hear it." Mason leaned closer. "Keep your voice down." "Not you're wrong. Not that didn't happen. Just keep your voice down." That told me almost everything. I asked quietly, "Should I also keep my standards down, since that seems to have worked better for you?" Theo made a sudden choking sound into his water. Mason shot him a look, then turned back to me. "This isn't what it looks like." There it was. The oldest sentence in the history of getting caught. I folded my hands. "Okay." He blinked, clearly expecting resistance. Instead, I waited. Silence makes liars work harder. After a few seconds, he said, "Lena was upset." "About?" He hesitated. "Personal things." "Which are?" "That's private." "How convenient." "Ilara?" "No," I said, letting steel enter my voice for the first time. "You don't get to interrupt truth with performance anymore." That shut him up. For months, I had imagined anger as something loud, but real anger can be terrifyingly composed. Sometimes it only arrives after grief gets tired. "You told me she needed closure," I said. "She does." "Then closure looks remarkably flirtatious." "That's unfair." "Is it?" "You're making assumptions." That almost broke something in me. Assumptions. A screenshot. 7 lunches. His body language across the restaurant. At some point, reality stops being an assumption. It becomes observation. I leaned back. "Then help me understand why you're sitting on the same side of a booth with a woman you supposedly just support emotionally." He opened his mouth. Closed it. That tiny hesitation said more than a confession. Before he could answer, Lena stood from across the room and approached slowly. "Mason." He turned sharply. "Not now." That alone told me enough. If everything had been innocent, there would have been no reason to manage her. No reason to control timing. No reason to silence anyone. Theo muttered beside me, "Well, this is healthier than therapy." I almost laughed, which felt absurd, but sometimes humor is just your nervous system trying not to collapse. Lena looked at me, then Theo, then Mason. "I'm leaving," she said. Mason rubbed his forehead. "Lena." I said I'm leaving. Then she looked directly at me, not with apology, not with arrogance, just exhaustion. That expression hit me harder than I expected. For the first time, I realized this mess probably contained more lies than mine. She grabbed her purse and walked out. Mason watched her go, then turned back to me. No performance left. Just anger. "This is unbelievable." I stood slowly. "No," I said, "this is overdue." Something in his face changed. Until that moment, I think he still believed this was recoverable through argument. If he pushed hard enough, talked fast enough, reframed aggressively enough, maybe I would apologize for making things uncomfortable. That had worked before, mostly because caring about someone can make even decent people tolerate behavior they would never accept from anyone else. He stepped closer. Elara, can we not do this here? Now privacy matters? His jaw tightened. This isn't a joke. No, it really isn't. Theo stood, not aggressively, just enough to signal he was no longer pretending this was normal lunch conversation. I'm going to give you 2 space, he said. You don't have to. He gave me a small look that said he knew. Then he leaned closer and said quietly, call me if he gets stupid. After Theo stepped away toward the bar, Mason lowered his voice. What exactly do you think happened? I laughed once, tired and humorless. That question revealed everything. Not what do you know. Not let me explain. What do you think happened? As if interpretation was the problem. I folded my arms. You really want to do this? Yes. Fine. I think you lied to me for months. I think you turned your ex into a recurring emotional obligation so I would feel cruel for objecting. I think every time I got uncomfortable, you made my discomfort the problem instead of your behavior. That's not fair. There's that word again. He dragged a hand over his face. You're being emotional. That almost impressed me. The audacity of using an old weapon after it had already expired. I said quietly, that sentence would have worked better before I watched you flirt over wine. His face hardened. We weren't flirting. Mason, I said gently, lying works best when the other person wasn't physically present. He looked away first. That told me enough. You don't understand the whole story, he said. Then tell it. Silence. Finally, he said, things with Lena are complicated. Complicated is usually the word people reach for when the honest version sounds much worse. I asked, complicated how? She was going through something. What? That's personal. Convenient. Elara, stop acting like everything is black and white. I almost smiled. Some people love calling everything complicated because complexity gives them somewhere to hide. But respect is not complicated. Honesty is not complicated. Faithfulness is not an advanced moral puzzle. I said, human beings are complicated. Choices are often not. For a second, I saw something real in his face. Not remorse. Fear. Not fear of losing me. Fear of losing control of the story. Those are different things, though people often confuse them. He stepped closer. Elara, let's go somewhere private. No. Please. That word almost caught me off guard. Suddenly he sounded softer. Human. And for one dangerous second, I remembered the man I had loved. The version who brought me soup when I was sick. The version who remembered I hated artificial grape flavor. The version who kissed my forehead in grocery store lines. That is why leaving hurts. It hurts less because you lost a villain, and more because you lost someone who was genuinely real in certain moments. But isolated good memories are not enough to build trust on. I looked at him and said, I don't think you miss honesty. I think you miss access. That visibly hit him. Elara. No, you don't get to explain your way out of this over dessert. His expression changed then. Less pleading. More defensive. So that's it? That's it. You're ending 2 years over lunch? No, I'm ending 2 years over repeated deception. Lunch just happened to have witnesses. The silence between us felt enormous. Restaurant noise blurred around us. Plates clinked. Someone laughed near the entrance. Life continued, as always, cruelly ordinary. Mason stared at me, then asked, Is this about Theo? There it was. Projection. No. You expect me to believe that? I looked at him carefully, and in that moment, I understood something. I wish I had learned sooner. People who betray trust often struggle to imagine innocence in others. Their own deception becomes the ruler they measure everyone with. I said, The fact that this is where your mind goes says much more about you than me. He scoffed. Unbelievable. No, I said softly. Painfully believable. I grabbed my bag. For a moment, he looked stunned, like he genuinely thought there would be more negotiation, more tears, more chances to turn the conversation around. But grief had already done its work. I said one last thing before walking away. When trust dies, the relationship usually ends earlier than people admit. The breakup conversation is just the funeral. Then I walked out. I didn't look back. It wasn't strength, because I knew if I saw his face one more time, memory might start editing him again, and heartbreak survives far too long when nostalgia becomes its defense attorney. I made it to my car before the shaking started. Not dramatic trembling. Just the quiet physical reaction your body has when it realizes it has been holding itself together by pride alone. I sat behind the wheel with both hands gripping the steering wheel and stared at nothing. I used to think discovering betrayal would be the hardest part. It wasn't. The hardest part was the silence immediately after choosing myself. Anger gives you adrenaline. Confrontation gives you movement. But once both disappear, grief sits beside you and asks, "Now what?" Theo texted first. "You okay?" I stared at it, then replied, "Ask me in 6 months." He answered, "Fair." That made me smile despite everything. A tired smile, but real. That night was ugly. It wasn't that I wanted Mason back. I didn't. What hurt was mourning the version of him I had believed in. Heartbreak is not always about missing the actual person. Sometimes it is grieving your own misplaced hope. By morning, Mason had called 9 times. By noon, 12. His texts evolved in stages. First, outrage. What you did was humiliating. Then, justification. You completely misunderstood the situation. Then, blame. Theo has been manipulating this whole thing. Then, bargaining. Can we please talk like adults? Then, nostalgia. After everything we've been through? Then, finally, I love you. That sentence annoyed me more than it hurt. Hearing "I love you" after months of deception felt insulting, not comforting. I didn't answer. The next day, Theo called. His voice sounded exhausted. "She knows." "Knows what?" "That I told you." I leaned against my kitchen counter and closed my eyes. How? Apparently, I was the only realistic option. "Are you okay?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "She called me a traitor, said I ruined her relationship." That irritated me instantly. As if truth ruined the relationship, not the behavior that required truth to be exposed. "What did you say?" I asked. "The truth." "And?" "She said I've always judged Mason." "Do you?" "Yes." I laughed despite myself. Then his voice softened. "She also said I wanted you." I went quiet. "Did you?" He paused, then answered carefully. "No, I cared about what was happening to you. Don't confuse that with wanting you." It was simple, honest, a little awkward, and that was exactly why I believed it. Then things got uglier, because some people do not simply lose relationships. They launch campaigns. By Monday, mutual friends started reaching out. Apparently, Mason had been busy. According to him, I had been emotionally distant for months. Theo and I had been growing suspiciously close. The restaurant lunch had been a staged humiliation, and Mason, poor Mason, had only been trying to support an emotionally fragile ex-girlfriend through a difficult time. It would have been insulting if it were not so predictable. Mason wasn't trying to tell the most believable story. He was telling the version that made him look least guilty. And that version spread quickly, because most people would rather believe a simple story than untangle a messy truth. One mutual friend called and said carefully, "I just wanted to hear your side." That phrase used to make me anxious. This time it didn't. I simply said, "He repeatedly lied about intimate lunches with his ex. I saw them together. I ended it." There was a pause. Then she said, "Oh, exactly." No 10-minute defense, no emotional evidence presentation, no begging to be believed. People who know your character usually do not need much explanation. People who do not were never really your audience. Nothing romantic happened between Theo and me then. We were both too emotionally exhausted for anything that simple. We kept talking slowly, carefully, because there was something healing about being around someone whose words and actions matched. Consistency is not flashy. After chaos, it feels like oxygen. Theo later told me, Mason and Lena had a brutal argument after she walked out of the restaurant, which made Lena's call a week later feel far less random. A week later, Lena called me. I almost ignored it. Curiosity won. Her voice sounded tired, not manipulative, not dramatic, just tired. "Elara?" "Yes." A long pause. Then she said, "I didn't know." I stayed quiet. "He told me you two were basically over." Of course he did. No one thinks they are participating in betrayal when the liar gives them moral permission first. I asked, "Did you believe him?" Another pause. Then quietly, "Yes." That answer felt honest. More honest than anything Mason had given me in weeks. "I'm sorry," she said. And the strangest thing was that I believed her. I wasn't pretending she was innocent. She wasn't. But remorse sounds different from self-preservation. After we hung up, I sat for a long time thinking about how relationships do not always end because one person is a villain and the other is pure. Sometimes they end because one person chooses comfort over honesty so many times that the damage becomes permanent. Understanding that did not excuse it, but it helped me stop needing a cleaner story. Mason texted one final time a few nights later. "I miss you. I know I messed up. Can we talk?" I stared at it longer than I want to admit. Temptation wasn't the issue. Memory was the real problem. Because memory is cruel. It does not archive pain neatly. It mixes betrayal with tenderness, lies with old jokes, disrespect with forehead kisses, and then asks you to make a decision while holding all of it. Finally, I typed, I hope you find whatever you were looking for, but it won't be with me." Then I blocked him. Not angrily, almost gently. Because closure is not always a conversation. Closure can be as simple as deciding the explanation no longer changes anything. A few days later, Theo sent me a photo, a plate of calamari. Caption: "Never eating calamari the same way again." I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my tea. And for the first time in a long time, the laughter did not hurt.